It was a cold winter evening, and the snow was falling heavily outside. 13-year-old Lily sat huddled in a corner, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her body in an attempt to keep warm. Tears streamed down her face as she stared up at her uncle, pleading with him to let her stay. "Uncle, please don't kick me out," she begged, her voice shaking with fear. "I don't want to go back to my mother." Her uncle, John, looked down at her with a mixture of sadness and frustration. He loved Lily dearly, but he couldn't continue to support her indefinitely. Lily's mother had a long history of drug abuse and neglect, and she had been unable to provide for her daughter in any meaningful way. John had taken Lily in several months ago, but he was struggling to make ends meet as it was. He couldn't continue to support her on his own, and he didn't want her to become a burden on his own family. "Lily, you know I love you," he said gently, "but I just can't keep taking care of you. It's not fair to my own family." Lily's heart sank as she heard the words. She knew that her uncle was right, but the thought of going back to her mother filled her with terror. She had spent her whole life in a state of constant fear and uncertainty, never knowing where she would sleep at night or where her next meal would come from. As the reality of the situation sank in, Lily began to tremble with cold and fear. She didn't know what to do or where to go. All she knew was that she couldn't go back to her mother's house. "Please, Uncle," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do anything. I'll work hard and help out around the house. Just please don't make me go back there." John looked down at her, his heart breaking at the sight of her shivering in the cold. He knew that he couldn't turn her away, not when she was in such a vulnerable state. "Okay, Lily," he said finally. "You can stay for a little while longer, but we need to figure out a more permanent solution for you." Over the next few days, John worked tirelessly to find a solution for Lily's predicament. He reached out to social services and other community organizations, trying to find someone who could take Lily in and provide for her. In the meantime, Lily worked hard to earn her keep. She helped out around the house, doing chores and running errands for her uncle. She knew that she was lucky to have a roof over her head, and she was determined to prove that she was worth the effort. Despite their efforts, however, it seemed like there was no solution in sight. Every organization that John reached out to was either full or unable to take in another child. As the days turned into weeks, Lily began to lose hope. She didn't know what would happen to her, and the thought of being alone and vulnerable again filled her with dread. But just when things seemed darkest, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. John received a call from an old friend who worked at a local foster care agency. They had a family who was willing to take in Lily, at least on a temporary basis. John was thrilled at the news, and he immediately called Lily into the room to share it with her. Lily couldn't believe her ears. After so many weeks of uncertainty and fear, there was finally a chance for her to have a stable and loving home. The following day, John took Lily to meet her new foster family. As they drove towards the house, Lily's heart was filled with both excitement and fear. She didn't know what to expect, but she hoped that this would be the beginning of a new and better life for her. When they arrived at the house, Lily was greeted by a warm and friendly couple who introduced themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. They showed her around the house, which was cozy and welcoming, and introduced her to their two children, a boy and a girl who were around Lily's age. Lily was overwhelmed by the kindness and generosity of the Johnsons. She couldn't believe that there were people in the world who would open up their homes and hearts to a stranger like her. Over the next few weeks, Lily settled into her new life with the Johnsons. She attended school with their children and spent her evenings doing homework, playing games, and watching movies with the family. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. As she adjusted to her new life, Lily began to reflect on her past. She thought about her mother, who had never been able to provide for her, and she wondered what had happened to her. One day, Lily worked up the courage to ask Mrs. Johnson if she knew anything about her mother. To her surprise, Mrs. Johnson revealed that she had actually met Lily's mother several years ago when she was working at a local homeless shelter. She was a troubled woman, Mrs. Johnson said softly, but she had a good heart. She talked about you a lot and how much she loved you." Lily was surprised to hear this. She had always thought of her mother as neglectful and uncaring, but it seemed like there was more to the story than she had realized. As time went on, Lily grew close to the Johnsons and began to see them as a second family. She knew that she was lucky to have found such kind and loving people, and she felt grateful for every moment that she spent with them. Although she still missed her mother and worried about her future, Lily knew that she was finally in a safe and stable environment. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she had hope. As time went on, Lily became more and more comfortable with the Johnsons. She started to share more about her past and her dreams for the future with them. They were always supportive and encouraging, never judgmental or dismissive. One day, as she was helping Mrs. Johnson with the groceries, Lily saw a familiar face walking down the street. It was her mother, looking even more frail and lost than Lily remembered. She was pushing a shopping cart filled with her belongings, and her eyes were downcast. Lily's heart raced as she watched her mother approach. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to run to her mother and hug her, but she also felt angry and hurt by all the times her mother had let her down. Mrs. Johnson noticed Lily's distress and followed her gaze to the woman on the street. She put a hand on Lily's shoulder and said, "Do you want to talk to her?" Lily hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Mrs. Johnson went back inside to wash the children, while Lily stepped out to approach her mother. For a few moments, they just stood there, staring at each other. Then Lily's mother reached out to her, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Lily," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry for everything." Lily felt a surge of emotions. She wanted to forgive her mother, but she also felt angry and hurt. She looked at her mother for a moment longer, and then turned and walked back to the Johnsons' house. Mrs. Johnson was waiting for her at the door. She put an arm around Lily and said, "It's okay. We're here for you." Lily cried in Mrs. Johnson's arms for a while, then slowly composed herself. She looked up at Mrs. Johnson and said, "Thank you. Thank you for everything." Mrs. Johnson smiled and said, "You're always welcome here, Lily. We're your family now." And with those words, Lily felt a sense of peace that she had never felt before. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she was not alone. She had found a home and a family, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly happy. Over the next few weeks, Lily started to think more and more about her mother. She couldn't stop worrying about her and wondering what had happened to her. She knew that she had been neglectful in the past, but she also knew that she loved her daughter deeply. One day, Lily decided to go out and look for her mother. She walked through the streets of the city, asking people if they had seen a woman matching her mother's description. It was a daunting task, but Lily was determined to find her. After a few hours of searching, Lily finally spotted her mother sitting on a bench in a park. She was surrounded by her belongings, and her eyes were closed. Lily approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Mom," she said softly. "Mom, it's me." Her mother opened her eyes slowly and looked up at her. For a moment, she just stared at Lily, and then a smile spread across her face. "Lily," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Oh, my dear Lily." They hugged each other tightly, both of them crying tears of joy and relief. Over the next few days, Lily helped her mother to find a shelter and a job. She was determined to help her get back on her feet, and she knew that it wouldn't be easy. But she also knew that she had the support of the Johnsons, and that gave her the strength to keep going. In the months that followed, Lily's mother slowly but steadily got her life back on track. She found a job as a housekeeper, and she started saving up to get her own apartment. She and Lily started to spend more time together, going to movies, taking walks in the park, and talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. Lily knew that things would never be perfect between her and her mother, but she also knew that they had a chance to start again. She had found a new family with the Johnsons, and she had also found a way to forgive her mother and move forward. Years later, Lily looked back on that moment when she had been shivering with cold and fear, and she realized that it had been the start of a new life for her. She had faced her fears and found a family who loved her unconditionally. And she had learned that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. As Lily grew older, she never forgot the kindness and love that the Johnsons had shown her. She stayed in touch with them, even after she left their home to go to college and start her own life. She visited them often, and they always welcomed her with open arms. Lily became a successful lawyer, and she used her skills to help others who were facing similar challenges to those she had faced as a child. She volunteered at shelters and legal clinics, offering her time and expertise to those who needed it most. Throughout it all, Lily remained close to her mother. They had their ups and downs, but they always found their way back to each other. Lily had learned to forgive her mother, but more importantly, she had learned to love her for who she was. In time, Lily got married and had children of her own. She shared her story with them, hoping to teach them about the power of love and the importance of helping others. And she never forgot the lessons she had learned from the Johnsons. That family is not just about blood, but about the people who love and support you, no matter what. As for the Johnsons, they continued to be a beacon of hope and love in their community. They took in other children who needed a home, and they worked tirelessly to make their community a better place. Lily knew that she was lucky to have found them, and she knew that she would always be grateful for their love and support. She hoped that others would be inspired by their story, and that they would find their own way to make a difference in the world. Because in the end, that was what it was all about, making the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. And so, the years passed, and Lily continued to live her life with purpose and love. She never forgot the little girl she had once been, shivering with cold and fear, and she used that memory to inspire her to help others who were struggling. One day, Lily received a letter in the mail. It was from Mrs. Johnson, who had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Lily felt a pang of sadness, but also a deep sense of gratitude for all that the Johnsons had done for her. She knew that their legacy would live on, in the countless lives they had touched and the love they had shared. Lily attended Mrs. Johnson's funeral, along with many other people whose lives had been touched by the Johnsons. As they said their goodbyes to Mrs. Johnson, Lily felt a sense of closure and peace. She knew that Mrs. Johnson was now at rest, but that her love and kindness would continue to inspire others for generations to come. As Lily walked away from the funeral, she looked up at the sky and smiled. She knew that the world was a better place because of people like the Johnsons, and she felt grateful to have known them. And so, Lily continued on her journey, with a heart full of love and a spirit of kindness. She knew that there were still challenges ahead, but she also knew that she was not alone. For she had the love and support of her family, both old and new, and she had the memory of the Johnsons to guide her. As she walked down the street, a little girl approached her, shivering with cold. Lily smiled and took the girl's hand, leading her to a nearby shelter. She knew that this was her chance to pay it forward, to offer love and hope to someone who needed it. And so, Lily continued to spread love and kindness wherever she went, inspired by the legacy of the Johnsons and the memory of the little girl she had once been. As the years passed, Lily became a beacon of hope and inspiration to those around her. She dedicated her life to helping others, and her passion for justice and equality made her a respected and influential figure in her community. Her work as a lawyer took her all over the world, and she used her platform to raise awareness about important social issues. She fought tirelessly for the rights of women, children, and marginalized communities, and her efforts helped to make the world a more just and equitable place. Despite all of her success, Lily never forgot the lessons she had learned from the Johnsons. She remained humble and grounded, and she continued to be grateful for the love and support of her family, friends, and community. As she grew older, Lily looked back on her life with a sense of pride and fulfillment. She had overcome incredible adversity, and she had used her experiences to make a positive impact on the world. And so, as Lily approached the end of her life, she felt a sense of peace and contentment. She knew that she had lived a life filled with purpose and love, and she was grateful for every moment of it. As she closed her eyes for the final time, Lily thought of the Johnsons and the love and kindness they had shown her so many years ago. She knew that their legacy would live on, in the countless lives they had touched and the love they had shared. And so, as Lily took her last breath, she smiled, knowing that her life had been a tribute to the love and kindness that the Johnsons had shown her so long ago. At Lily's funeral, the church was filled with people from all walks of life who had been touched by her kindness and generosity. They shared stories of how Lily had inspired them and how her work had changed their lives for the better. As they lowered her coffin into the ground, a young girl approached, shivering with cold. She was one of the many children that Lily had helped over the years, and she clutched a bouquet of flowers in her hand. "Thank you," the girl whispered. "Thank you for everything." The people gathered around the grave fell silent, touched by the girl's words. They knew that Lily's legacy would live on, in the lives of the countless people she had touched and the love she had shared. As the mourners dispersed, a young woman approached the grave. She was a lawyer, just like Lily had been, and she had been inspired by her work. She knelt down and placed a single rose on the grave, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for paving the way," she whispered. "Thank you for showing us what it means to live a life of purpose and love." And so, Lily's legacy lived on, in the lives of those she had touched and the love she had shared. Her life was a testament to the power of kindness and the resilience of the human spirit, and she had left the world a better place than she had found it. As the sun set over the cemetery, the people who had gathered to pay their respects looked up at the sky and smiled, knowing that Lily was at peace and that her memory would live on forever.